Hey y'all, welcome back to Ashley's Homestead Adventures. Today we are in the kitchen all day and we are working on bread and some dog food and things like that. So come along. My day started really early in the morning. It was about 5:15 in the morning here. I'm still in my PJs and we are starting out with this beautiful loaf of sourdough bread. Just doing some stretches and folds here and then we'll cover it back up for about 30 minutes. You can see it's now 6:19 and we're back. We're going to do some more stretch and folds. I do 6 sets of stretch and folds and I do 4 stretches every time I do stretches and folds. So even though you're not seeing all 4, I do it 4 times every time we stretch and fold. Cover it back up. I'm gonna go keep drinking some coffee. Now we're at 6:37. You can see the dough is starting to get a little bit more shiny. It changes through these stretches and folds, and what we're doing here for the bread is we're growing the gluten strands. Cover it back up, come back at 6:59. Starting to look a little bit more like a dough ball instead of a shaggy mess. A little bit more uniform here. We just want to stretch it as best we can to keep creating those wonderful gluten strands that creates a good, chewy, airy bread. It's 7:36 and lights are on. Everybody in the house is awake, so I can turn some lights on for you guys. We're going to do some more stretching and folding here. This is our last set. There we go. Showing you how springy it is and how sticky it still is, that it's okay that it's still sticky. We're going to cover it up and it's going to sit on the counter for 12 hours. It's bulk fermentation. Now I'm moving on to labeling a bread sack for a loaf that I cooked last night. And this loaf is actually going to a friend with a jar of freezer strawberry jam that I made. Just packaging this up to go in the truck with me when I go out and about and deliver that. Now we're moving on to our chicken feet. This is the bone broth that's been cooking for 3 days. And all we did was put the chicken feet in the crock pot, added a little bit of apple cider vinegar and filled it to the top with water and let it slow cook on low for 3 days. And it extracts all the wonderful nutrients out of these bones. And I actually put these bones in a bowl. I'm going to save them for making cat food later. Now we're just taking the broth and running it through a strainer. This broth is going to go to make dog food. And I don't want any, pieces of bone or anything in this. So I go ahead and strain it through a sieve. And then this is going to go in the refrigerator and sit and let that fat all rise to the top so I can skim it off. These are the chicken feet that have been in the bone broth for 3 days, and I'm going to blend these up and turn them into cat food. These are the 2 chickens that were in the roaster. They're cooked and we're just gonna let them cool, and then we'll shred the meat off of the bones on these. This is the juice off of the chickens that we're cooking, and I'm gonna save this to add into my next batch of bone broth. This is the finished bone broth that is going to cool in the fridge, and then I will skim the fat off of it and add it into the next batch of dog food that we're gonna make with that chicken. Dogs don't do well with fat, so we're gonna go ahead and skim that off before we use the broth in their dog food. Here on the left is the broth that we have from the chickens cooking for 15 hours, and then on the right is the bone broth that we cooked for 3 days to get the nutrients out of it. Same chickens from our farm, just the difference in between regular broth and bone broth. It's quite a difference. We left and went to the a livestock auction. We didn't come home with anything, so I'm not holding any secrets from you, but now I'm back and we are back in the kitchen continuing some of our projects. We are going to go ahead and preheat our oven. I set it here at 500, but it actually should have been preheated to 450 because we're cooking a chocolate loaf. So I fixed that later, but I preheated it too hot. Here I'm taking the clothespins off of the tea towel that I have over my loaf of bread. I use the clothespins to tell me how many stretch and folds I've done, so I don't lose track if I have more than one loaf going at a time. It just makes it easier for me and I don't have to think so hard. Here is our loaf of bread that we had stretched and fold this morning, and it popped out of the pan with almost no residue, which is always a feeling of success. We're just going to kind of gently stretch it out here. We don't want to burst open or ruin the air pockets and the bubbles that we have created through the stretches and folds and growing the gluten in there. Those air bubbles are going to create the holes in our sourdough bread. So I'm just gently stretching it out here to form kind of a rectangle. That's one of the big bubbles in there. I'm just playing with the bubbles. And then we're going to fold it in thirds, basically. And then just roll it up. Tuck in some of the sides just roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. It is going to go into a Benetton basket and go into the refrigerator for its proofing overnight. Now we're going to move on to feeding Cheeky, my sourdough starter. She's looking beautiful and bubbly and happy, but she does need to be fed again, and she is not big enough here to make a loaf of bread. So we are going to just go ahead and take all of what is in here and basically triple her in size. So we're just going to add some water. She weighed 50 grams, so I'm feeding her 50 grams of water and then 50 grams of flour. And I do use wheat flour and regular flour here, but it equals out to 50 grams of each water and flour to her 50 gram weight. And then we'll just mix her up. And put her in a jar to sit on the counter and get happy to make a loaf of bread tomorrow. And sometimes this happens. Sometimes we use our sourdough starters up until there's just almost nothing left, and you just got to feed them a couple times and get their bulk back up. It's not any huge deal. She grows perfectly fine. She'll be happy there on the counter. I have a piece of parchment paper here, and this is the chocolate loaf that just came out of the Benetton basket. It has been in the fridge, and we're just going to sprinkle some flour on top here and give it a good rub. This is a nice firm loaf. You can see how well it's standing up there. The chocolate sourdough, I have found, tends to do that for me, and I don't particularly know why. This is called scoring, and we're just giving this loaf a good score. This cut is my big deep cut. It needs a big deep cut for the steam to escape out of the loaf so that the loaf doesn't rupture where you don't want it to. All we're basically doing is we're creating places for the steam to escape, and by doing that we're creating designs. We're telling it where we want the steam to escape to make a beautiful design rather than just letting it explode wherever it wants to. Cast iron's been in the oven preheating, and I did lower the temperature to 450. We're going to go ahead and put this loaf in the cast iron, and then I have a fairly small cast iron, so I always go around the sides and make sure that I push the parchment paper down so that it doesn't create any tension around the loaf. Make sure that the loaf has got plenty of room to expand and not change the shape of the loaf. In it goes. This is my fast homestead dinner. That's a burger patty from the beef we grew here on the farm with some cottage cheese and onions, a sourdough toast that we made here on the farm, and a canned pickle. Don't forget to leave your Benetton baskets next to the oven while you're baking your bread. This helps them dry out so that you don't get mold in your Benetton baskets. We're going to, this is 20 minutes later, we're going to take the lid off. She's already looking absolutely gorge. This is 20 minutes later. I'm going to go ahead and take her temp and see where she's at here. And she's not quite where I'd like her to be as far as temperature goes. So I'm actually going to close it back up and cook for another 10 minutes. So it was 20 minutes with the lid on and 30 minutes with the lid off. I have decreased the oven temp to 425 for the lid off portion of the bake. I am happy here, so I'm going to go ahead and take her out. And we'll get her off of the parchment paper and onto a cooling rack. She looks absolutely beautiful. I'm pretty proud of this loaf. I hope you guys enjoyed today. Thank you so much for coming along. I'll catch you on the next one. Yours truly.